Hello again, everyone. This is Bob. Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Bianca Errigo, wellness expert, performance coach, and founder of Human-OS. Bianca brings a powerful blend of lived experience, deep coaching expertise, and organizational insight to the conversation around how we build healthier, more human-centered workplaces, especially as AI transforms the very nature of work itself. We explore the intersection of well-being, psychological safety, and AI readiness. Bianca shares how Human-OS helps individuals and organizations navigate change with intention, combining real human support with scalable digital tools. We also talk about trust, transparency, and why fostering balance, belonging, and development is more important than ever. Let's jump into this thoughtful conversation about human potential and human centricity in the age of AI. Thanks again for tuning in. Hey everyone, this is Bob Pulver. Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Bianca Errigo from across the pond. How are you today, Bianca?
I am doing great, thank you, Bob. Yeah, really excited to be here, excited for this conversation, and yeah, excited to do it.
Yeah, likewise. I know you've been traveling quite a bit, and some of your trips sound amazing, some sound exhausting, but glad to have you here. So, just to kick things off, Bianca, why don't you just give my listeners kind of overview of your background? I know you've done a lot of different things before winding up as a startup founder. So let's hear a little bit about it.
Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Lovely to meet you. My name's Bianca Errigo, founder of Human-OS. I'm also a speaker, apparently a thought leader, wellness expert, but definitely not always been in health and well-being. To keep it brief and to try and, give you an idea, I think the best way to explain my career is a bit like a bowl of spaghetti. And so I've always been fascinated by the human brain, human behavior. Why do we think, feel, behave the way we do? I graduated in psychology, but unfortunately, due to the terminal illness of my father, I had to get a job very quickly out of university. So I actually started my career in tech sales for a big American company, actually, CDW. So probably most listeners are aware of the company. So started on their sales floor. I was one of two women on my team. I was one of the youngest people in the company, worked my way up through the company. Whilst doing this, sort of was throwing my grief and my pain and my stress into this job and sort of disregarded my own health, well-being. When my father passed away, I ended up in hospital, what we'd probably now term burnout. My stomach walls could no longer work. I couldn't sleep lying down. I had fibromyalgia, anxiety, depression. And this was a real moment of reckoning for me and sort of threw my life in a very different direction. So I took some time out, just focused on my own personal mental, physical health. I then started fallen in love again with the psychology and the science, and particularly now more, it was at the time around the impacts of stress on the brain, on the body. This was pre-pandemic, so it wasn't discussed in the ways it is now. I began coaching. I've now got 12,000 coaching hours. I've coached everything from Hollywood celebrities to professional England sports people to billionaire CEOs, stay-at-home mums and dads, everything in between. And then on that journey, sort of loved coaching, but for me, well-being, performance, health, it's always been something that everyone should have access to, not just a certain percentage of the population. That then led to me delivering talks, which led to me designing well-being strategies in the corporate space, did a lot of work with American Express, Snapchat, Dell, University of Cambridge. And then on that journey, I guess, became really obsessed with the data and the challenges I was seeing in the workplace, the challenges that I was seeing around what sort of we now term human sustainability and what that looks like, and all the amazing work that Deloitte's doing in that area. And yeah, Human-OS sort of grew from there, really trying to bring in that data and the human support to create change in the workplace.
Wow, amazing journey. I mean, you must feel really good about all the things that you've been able to accomplish because it sounds like you kind of went through hell and kept going.
I think I feel good about it most days.
Yeah,
And then startup life other days where you regret your choices no matter how good they may be.
right, right. Yeah, no, startup life, solopreneurship in my case, is definitely not easy and not for the faint of heart. And there's a lot to juggle. There's a lot to think about. I think when we spoke earlier, a lot of what you're doing and what you've been through personally really resonated with me. Not that I can relate to each aspect of that journey, but certainly the need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others, so that we can focus, and so that we can move forward and accomplish what we want to accomplish and achieve what we know we can achieve given the right sort of support system and things like that. And we talked a lot about human centricity as it relates to working with emerging technology like artificial intelligence. So I know we'll get pretty deep into that as we talk. And so one of the things, before we do that, just if you could give folks just a quick overview of what human OS is and the kind of programs and structures that you help organizations with or help individuals with, and who you're targeting and things like that.
Yeah, of course. And I love what I just have to say, I love what you were saying there about support and things like that, because I think actually as individuals, we so often feel like we have to do things alone and we take the weight of the world on our shoulders. And actually, just being able to have that vulnerability and be able to seek that support is just so transformative, and actually probably has more of an impact than any of the wellbeing solutions or AI or anything we're going to discuss today. And yeah, so I love that. But for Human OS, back to the point, back to the question. And so we really sit at the intersection of well-being, performance, sustainability. I always say we're where powerful technology meets human expertise. And so what we are on a mission to do is sort of twofold, really. On one hand, we want to support organizations. We want to support them in building the environments that individuals need to be able to show up to work, to have meaning, to have fulfillment on their journeys of what we call sustainable high performance. So how do we perform at a certain level, and how do we do so repeatedly without compromising our health, our well-being? And then on the other side of things, what we do is we built a platform with data tracking and habit tracking and goal setting and masterclasses and micro content, so that individuals can go onto the platform and they can engage with the platform and engage with the coaches, and so that they have a really proactive approach to their health and their well-being.
So Bianca, before we dive pretty deep into human centricity and all these other topics, I just thought we could give listeners an overview of Human OS. What you're doing, the programs and support that you're offering to individuals and companies, and the target audience and things like that.
Yeah, of course. So Human OS really sits at the intersection of well-being, performance, sustainability. It's a 360 platform that offers personalized coaching with real human experts. And then we combine it with some really powerful data and technology and practical interventions to help individuals improve things like energy, mood, focus, resilience. We very much focus on like the hard skills and the human skills, as we put it. The problem is with most wellbeing solutions is they're very surface level, very reactive, very one size fits all, and they're not strategic, they're not personalized, they're not integrated into the cultural fabric of the organizations. And so what we then see is very low engagement, very low benefit. And so we really want to combine the human support side with the powerful technology to actually provide a platform that can drive behavior change and do so sustainably. So we tend to work with organizations from 20 to 2,000 employees in size. We do a lot of work in the enterprise sector as well, but that's more in terms of our consultancy and our keynotes and our masterclasses. But for the platform itself, 20 to 2,000, because we love to build really good relationships with the decision makers, with the employees, and really support them on a human level. A lot of our customers are either scaling or undergoing some type of change. A lot might just be more focusing on health, well-being, and try to be more proactive in that approach. And yeah, we work globally. We've got customers across Europe, across the States, across APAC. So it's a really exciting time for us.
I'm glad you mentioned, that these are organizations that are already going through some type of change and transformation, right? So I assume that means they've sort of acknowledged that they need to do a better job sort of culturally with, either proactively addressing burnout or engagement or inclusion or whatever the sort of impetus was. You're not going in there cold, dragging people to sort of change their whole sort of mentality about how they want to sort of mature and grow the organization.
Yeah, they tended to fall into like two groups. Either they've gone through like positive change, so they're growing really quickly. They need to attract new talent. They need to retain that talent. Maybe they're breaking into new countries and new demographics, or they're going through more negative change where, the company is changing direction, changing leadership. Maybe they've had to go through some redundancy, some cost savings. The culture is broken. It's got to a point we see a lot where they can no longer ignore the problems because they're just so blatantly obvious and their people are just so unhappy. And so either they want to do something about that because they care, or they're in a position where they can no longer ignore it anymore
Yeah,
because they've got no choice.
yeah. And based on the customers and the prospects that you talk to, I mean, is AI making the situation worse, or is it that the way that you sort of bring technology to bear in these engagements, that it sort of counterbalances, some of the technology induced, stress and anxiety and things like that? I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think I can't remember the last time I had a conversation with a customer where we weren't talking about AI in some capacity. I think there's a lot of fear mongering that still goes on when it comes to AI. And for individuals who maybe aren't into tech or, haven't necessarily been around like the transformations that are going on within tech, it's very easy to think that AI is this really recent thing that suddenly has just been designed and it's been designed to take over your job and the whole world is on fire and it's all terrifying and the robots are going to rule the world in 5 years. And actually that's just not the reality. And as we know, like AI has been around for decades. It's had surges of popularity. It's lost its funding. It's had surges of popularity again. It's had breakthroughs like any technical transformation. And so I think the main thing is in the education, both from a employer perspective, also from like a media perspective. Obviously, the media just love to fearmonger and they release headlines like 83 million job losses in the next 5 years. And so then obviously people are terrified. But I think actually there is so much opportunity that can come with this. I think a lot of organizations see the opportunity. I think a lot of employees, once they have the right education, see the opportunity, and it can really transform the way we work again and actually bring fulfillment back into the workplace and give people time and energy back to be doing what humans should be doing. So I think it's just, for me, we spend a lot of time on that education piece.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, and that aligns with a lot of the work that I've been doing around, well, obviously with this podcast, but other things as well, really trying to get people to wake up if they haven't been paying attention, or if you're an organizational leader, getting yourself in a position where you can take advantage of some of these technologies, as well as equip your workforce with the right literacy, not just like hands to keyboard, how can I use this to be more efficient and effective, but really to think about how do we redesign roles? How do we redesign workflows? How do we really think about what it's going to take to succeed, going forward, but also keeping people at the wheel and controlling, what they do with it, and making sure that that's done in a constructive and productive way. And so I think about that a lot in terms of AI literacy and AI readiness. So
The use case podcast is where technology vendors get to talk about themselves. And it's a wonderful place for vendors, investors, and practitioners to listen to the story of the solution, the features, the benefits, the attributes, etc. And we get to know the CEO or founder during the call, and we also get to know the tech. So subscribe to the Use Case Podcast.
as part of Human OS, do you take on that responsibility yourself, or do you find that there's folks that you sort of partner with to make sure that in order to, sort of extract and fuel that human potential that just comes, that's a part of it, right? Making sure people are in the right mindset by understanding more about how AI is actually impacting their role, their team, their organization.
Yeah, we work closely with the organization to understand like what are their AI strategies, policies, plans, goals. We don't get involved in that side of things, but we do work with them to learn about it, because then we feel we come in to support in that psychological safety piece of actually then how are we ensuring that organizations are having the right conversations, dealing with this change in the most healthy, constructive manner. How are we at a very sort of basic hands-on level, how are we ensuring that those managers know how to give information in the correct way, give feedback, support? How are we helping individuals build their resilience, and how are we helping them to navigate change in times of uncertainty? So we more act as like the support to actually the human-based skills once the organization has either put in the change or is going to put in the change, and we support them in that process. Okay, what does this look like now on a day-to-day basis for your employees and for your managers, your leaders, to ensure that this change is navigated in the most correct and effective manner?
Do you find that it's mostly HR leadership that is sort of in charge of this sort of, I guess if you're transfer, it depends on maybe how people scope the transformation itself, right? Do they bill it as a talent transformation and therefore HR takes the reins, or is it sort of spread out with other, sort of line of business leaders, or where do you see it?
I see a lot of variety. I think there's not necessarily the right way to do it, and no organization necessarily has the blueprint. And like any change, when an organization is going through change, they have to find the right path for them. So it really is no one size fits all and comes through one particular department. HR are always very hands-on when there's any form of change. So we do have a lot of conversations with them, but some of our customers are integrating it in different functions, different departments in different ways. Some are getting it better than others. But again, I think because people are not necessarily the most up to speed or educated on it, they don't know how they should be doing it. So you see a lot of different ways of going about it within the same organization. And I think that also then adds to the challenge, because then people don't really understand what's going on, because the business might not necessarily be giving out the same message to everyone.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that. I guess one of the other aspects is like sort of where you sit in the hierarchy of an organization. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of individual contributors, listening, who are thinking, I wish my organization, supported, had programs like this and supported this, both on just in terms of my own, as you mentioned, psychological safety and my own capacity to engage and collaborate and all these things that are necessary to get things done. But, managers are an important piece of the puzzle here, right? Because you've got to understand, what this means, what all of this change means for their own agency, as opposed to, make decisions and guide, those teams and be, stay on whatever path they're trying to stay on. So there's disruption happening all over.
And it's so impacted by individual readiness as well. If you have a manager who loves tech and can see the real benefit of automating those low value repetitive tasks and giving their team opportunities to get creative and to go and try out new ways of working and new ways of thinking, then they're very much going to be leaning into this and training their people and encouraging the use of AI. But then if you have other managers who are really scared that actually, is this going to take my job? Is this going to lead to redundancies? Is this going to give away crucial data? And again, that's also so industry dependent. Like, for example, a lot of our legal customers are so anti-AI because they're like, we don't want to give it any of our private information. So I think it's so dependent on individual readiness, the sector, the industry. And so that's why it's so important, I think, that organizations get really, really clear on what is our strategy here. How are we communicating our strategy? How are we role modeling this? Like, how are we making sure that top down, bottom up. This is the way we're doing it. And, all hands to deck on that. Because I think that's when challenges arise, is when there's that disjointment.
I imagine that because you're a global organization with global clients, there's a lot of cultural, disparity, right? And some of that could be driven by overarching, legislation and regulation in terms of what types of use cases AI should be taking
Yeah,
on, the protection of private
exactly.
information and all that.
Yeah, and I'm a big advocate, and at Human-OS, I think you can't necessarily put the same policy in place in every office, in every country. That you're going to have such huge cultural differences, and that has to be accounted for in every single area of business when you're going through change, when you're going through growth, when you're hiring, all of these things. If you try and have a blanket, this is what we're going to do, then it's not going to work. So having flexibility with those cultural adjustments and how you then are applying it, because like you said, some cultures will be really open to this and think it's a really great thing, others not so much. And so that then also then adds on to the complexity of how it's implemented.
Yeah, no doubt. I was thinking about this in the context of like any kind of AI literacy and readiness assessment, that there's some nuance that you need to sort of add to that depending on maybe the sort of module that you're focused on, not necessarily obviously, hands to keyboard, prompting or, thought partner kind of use cases, but just in terms of being educated on those specific like regional, differences in terms of what's required in terms of governance and compliance, but also just in terms of, you know, transparency and just some of the other, attributes of being sort of responsible and human centric may have some variation.
Yeah, for sure. And being hyper aware of the biases and how you're overcoming those biases locally. Also being hyper aware of what's going on within the regions that you are operating as an organization and trying to align that with when is the best time to approach this based on what is happening at sort of a local level as well is so important. If you have some America, for example, post-election, a lot of change, a lot of impact to many. That's going to be a very different response to over here in the UK, where we haven't had an election for a while. Very lucky that we don't have any wars going on at the moment. I think there's so many nuances to it, financial uncertainty, political uncertainty. All of these things have to be taken into account when you're implementing change of this scale, and particularly technology, because it's advancing so quickly. I think it scares people even more.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen a lot of recent articles and examples of where people are starting to, I guess the shine is sort of wearing off with some of the AI is one way to put it, where people are starting to say, well, everyone keeps talking about it. AI is going to help me do better or whatever. And it's not about, job loss, but, there are some realities that we need to face like any other, massive transformational change, whether it was, the invention of the internet or the advent of social media and things like that. Things will change and jobs will be lost. So I think we can't necessarily, sugarcoat that, but what we can do is guide people through programs like yours to say, well, as all of this evolves, what is my place here? And what are those skills that I can identify to make sure that I'm nurturing, those human skills as you described them. So how do folks think about, sort of their place in the future of work as all of this evolves? Are they thinking about what do I do to make sure that whatever trajectory my career takes, linear or nonlinear, that I'm positioning myself to
Yeah,
succeed?
it's a great question. And I think also, but on the point of change, like we need change. Most organizations are still designing systems and workflows and processes for efficiency, not for human well-being, not for high performance sustainability. And so much of how we work right now is still based on like the Industrial Revolution. And so it's so outdated anyway that it's very quick to think, oh, this change is going to be bad and negative. But then when you look at the data, only 13% of employees globally are engaged at work anyway. So you're like, well, actually, guys, it's pretty bad right now anyway. So let's see actually how can we embrace this change. And I think that's really when it comes down to an individual and actually where are we going to take ownership? Because there is so much outside of our control every single day. And it's very easy to get scared and overwhelmed when something's constantly in headlines and constantly being discussed and, everyone's speaking about it in the office. But actually, there are millions of things outside of our control that could take our job tomorrow, that could impact our lives. And this is just another thing, and that's okay. And so you as an individual, like actually each day you should be thinking about anyway, what can I take control of? What am I owning? What am I responsible for? How am I putting myself in the best position to succeed? And actually, what does success look like to me? What does that word mean? Because again, like success isn't necessarily a fancy job title or a fast car or a nice holiday home. Like, it's peace and fulfillment and joy. And it might be being have time to pick your kids up from school. It might be having money to go to Costa Rica for a holiday, like whatever it might be that is success to us. And so I think my advice to individuals is really like saying to them, like, understand what is success to you first and foremost, and then understand what are you doing to take responsibility of the things that are going to increase the chance of you getting there or staying there.
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I think people should be thinking about it. So that's great advice. I think when I think about the way that people are incentivized in their work, I think some of it, obviously you want to take advantage of whatever, support and upskilling and all those kinds of opportunities are presented. But I also want people to think about the AI literacy so that they are not just protectors of, the organizational, you know, machine or, the organization's data and things like that, sort of like in a defensive posture, but also actively thinking about what else I could do to help the company grow or help my teammates also, upskill themselves, right? Because you can't just have these individual productivity metrics. We've got to look at, team effectiveness. We've got to look at how we can collectively, move the organization forward. And so I think about this in the context of like responsible innovation, right? And what could you do with this newfound, knowledge, these new skills of working, side by side with AI or building your own, because soon we're all going to be builders, right? I mean, a lot of organizations are encouraging that already to build your own, agents, build agentic, workflows or whatever. Certainly not everyone's there yet. But when I think about those incredibly low engagement numbers that you mentioned before, when I think about the the amount of companies that are still sort of waiting and to see how this all shakes out, there's a lot of opportunity for people to jump in and just reimagine what could be done by this organization, right? New business models, new target markets, new things that we can do that we didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do before. And those are the things that I think organizations need to.
Hi, we're Meg and Amy from The Meg and Amy Show.
We're not only tech execs and big picture thinkers, we're also best friends.
We're curious learners. And on this podcast, we're challenging the status quo and activating the future.
And we're going to give advice about work and leadership, right, Meg?
We can't help ourselves. But this podcast is about exploring possibility, not being right.
That sounds refreshing.
For more, tune in to The Meg and Amy Show.
Think about when they think about the investment that they're making or that they are encouraged to make in that type of worker upskilling. Because if you look at all of these, both tangible and I guess I don't want to say intangible, but less obvious, benefits of doing this. I mean, if you want to, reverse the shrinking average tenure of employees, and you want to increase engagement and set yourself up for success longer term, that's what these investments will do. And your strategy is not going to execute itself, right? You need the people, perhaps digital labor as well, but you need the people that can actually sort of dream up and execute, some of these things that are going to set you up for that long-term success.
100%. And I always say, I heard the quote and I love it, but it's AI won't take your job, but someone who knows how to use it will. And I always go back to that. And I think for me, I when I'm having conversations with organizations about their AI sort of plans and dreams and desires. On one hand, yeah, I get super excited about the thought of hyper personalized solutions and really cool data insights and all the things we could do from a well-being perspective, from an organizational perspective as well. But then also there's the what I call it the less sexy stuff. Actually, how are you encouraging your managers to use this to give better feedback? How are you encouraging your leaders to use this to ensure that they are doing regular well-being check-ins as well as more historic KPIs and things we once would have looked at? Actually, there's so many smaller use cases we can be using AI to improve the human experience, to improve those human-based skills in a time in a world where they've never been so important. And so if you can do that, that's going to unlock the answer to so many of your problems anyway, because you're creating connection and you're creating trust and you're building psychological safety. And when you do that, people speak up. They take risks. They can then use the AI in certain ways to take things even further and to become even more creative, that you unlock so much. And I think that's where the balance had to be made as well. It doesn't have to be this massive investment all in one go. It can actually start small, trial, test, understand what are your real problems, what do you need to solve here, pick a couple of those, go out, try, iterate, test, communicate, do it with your employees, let them be part of that process, and then go again. And I think that then overcomes a lot of the challenge we see with that outgoing cost conversation and that resistance as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that people feel like they're part of this
100%.
transformation, right? And that's going to increase adoption. It's going to give people a sense of belonging to a community, that we're all trying to navigate this together. We might all have different, starting points. Some are more, technically minded and more technical roles, and some are not, but that doesn't mean that everyone can't take advantage and find some use cases for themselves or for their own, processes. And I feel like that's something, the statistics I'm seeing are still that it's more the technically minded staff that are embracing AI, but that's an opportunity for those folks to mentor others or to lead, internal communities, perhaps, that say, here's a bunch of people that are in the same boat. These are people that are, scared of technology, or they work in a certain department, in a certain domain, and they just need someone to sort of hold their hand a little bit, because otherwise there's just so much to try to absorb.
Yeah, totally. And if you look at all the data that came out of Davos at the World Economic Forum this year, we now know that the three biggest drivers to a fulfilled workforce, an engaged workforce, a high-performing workforce: balance, belonging, and development. And all three of those things can be unlocked through AI and the support of AI and the augmentation of AI. And so it's not about replacing anything, but it's about how are we educating that actually, if you use this, you are going to have more balance because you are going to have more time. We can use it to develop ourselves personally and our own self-awareness and our self-reflection, our self-development, but also professionally. And we went back to earlier, what skills do I need to learn in order to continue to progress in my career and to get to where I want to be. And that sense of belonging, we are all in this together. And like you said, that communication between the employee and the employer, the pandemic's an amazing example of this. When we go back to the pandemic, organizations had no idea what was going on. It was mass change. And what most organizations did exceptionally well during that time was communication. They were like, hey, we don't know what's going on. We do not know what the best approach is. We do not know what the plan is, but we're going to communicate with you every single day, every single week, and we'll manage and get through this together. And employees were so bought in because for the first time in so long, they felt respected, they felt valued, they felt listened to. And so they then started showing up for the workplace again. And I think there's the same opportunity here with AI. It's if you allow people to be part of this change with you, if you bring them into that journey, if you listen to them, if you educate them, this is something they could get really excited about and really use to the benefit of them, of the business, of the economy as a whole. And so it's about how are you taking those steps in that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. There was some interesting conversation over the last couple of weeks on LinkedIn about AI being used in like the performance management scenario, and I don't know if coaching, I guess coaching would kind of fall under that too, but like delivering that personal, feedback. And it was sort of went off on this like sort of dystopian kind of path where like people were talking about, well, if you work with AI enough, and then you're basically building almost like a digital twin of yourself, and then what could you do that? You're basically sort of trying to replicate yourself, but there's some ethical, limits to that, right? Like you wouldn't, if you're getting a performance review, as long as you're transparent of how maybe AI is used in that process, I think that's okay. But if you're trying to basically outsource a very personal, a very human sort of interaction where you're getting, feedback from someone who's supposed to know you and know your performance, know the team or whatever, really crossing some lines there. I mean, have you talked to folks about sort of putting some, parameters or, the scenarios in which AI, because you can, a lot of places where you can use AI, they're not necessarily the places that you should. So I'm just curious if you're hearing, do people talk to you about that?
Definitely. But I also must say we've heard of, and we have a lot of conversations of a lot of positive use cases, particularly in these performance reviews and one-on-ones as well. Sort of what I alluded to earlier with managers who, with all the goodwill in the world, maybe weren't given feedback in the correct way, or maybe didn't have that enough emotional intelligence to understand what they needed to be doing differently, or couldn't understand, and this is a true story, why everyone left their one-to-ones crying and thought they were delivering it and just being honest. And so, actually using AI and just really easy prompts. How do I give this feedback in a kind but constructive manner? How do I give this feedback balancing X, Y, and Z? So I think there's also really positive use cases for it. But again, definitely in a world which is so technologically advanced, it's never been so important to ensure we have real human connection in everything we do, and particularly in the workforce. And so if individuals within your organization are trying to use AI almost as a shortcut to doing the work, to learning the person, to learning the customer, it isn't going to work. It has to be adding to what they're doing. It can be used to find the research faster. It can be used to build the plans quicker, but there always has to be that human element to it. Otherwise, it is going to be completely missing the mark, and it is just also completely unethical. And I think it's very easy to spot. It's, if someone's reciting something that ChatGPT has created. So I think as an organization, again, it comes down to training people, and it comes down to, as the organizations, like what is allowed, what isn't allowed, what sits with you, what doesn't sit with you, like what are the standards that you are setting that you need people to meet, and finding that balance. And again, it'll be different for everyone, but spending time with that so that you try not to run into those challenges, because then that's just going to do the opposite of what you need. It's going to break the trust anymore. It's going to destroy the psychological safety. And so, yeah, it's going to take you from 13% engaged to 3 if you're lucky.
Right. Yeah. No, I think your point about trust is really really important. I mean, if we can't trust people that we work with, if we can't trust the solutions that we're using to try to augment, those humans, and we've got a fundamental breakdown as well, right? And I think just tying that back to your earlier point about like internal communications through the pandemic, for example, I feel like that's what organizations need to do in the case of AI as well. I mean, don't be silent. Don't say just this isn't allowed or what have you. There's very valid reasons to use it for specific use cases, and your employees are using it already. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, we look at the adoption of ChatGPT alone, which is one of countless tools. People are using this on at home, on their personal devices, probably on a work device as well. And you can't just stick your head in the sand. We went through this with social media and the internet. I'm old enough to remember those things. I don't think you are, but those were hugely disruptive, technologies that a lot of people weren't sure there was an actual justification for using those things. And we just we need to be honest with ourselves and transparent with our organizations to say, look, we are figuring this stuff out, but here's what we can tell you. We know that this is important for the future of this company. We know when we hire early career folks coming out of university that they probably used AI in their work somehow, and they're going to have that expectation when they enter the working world. So even from an employer branding perspective, being competitive for top talent, you have to understand that people are going to, you can't just come out of one environment and move to another and just take all the tech away, take all the toys away. I mean, I personally know what that feels like because I moved from one big organization to another. One was at the forefront of technology, and one should have been but was not. And it's like it's really awkward to go backwards from a technology evolution sort of standpoint. So the expectations have changed for current and future employees. So you've got to embrace that, but you've got to be transparent. Like, these are the things that we're thinking about. These are the specific technologies and use cases that we're exploring. If you've got ideas, going back to sort of going on offense, if you've got ideas about how where AI could be used responsibly and ethically, let's hear it, because that could help all of us, not just you individually or your specific team.
Yeah, 1,000%. And and having employees as those like co-creators, not just passive receptants, is so important. And I think particularly your point around the younger workforce it's such a valid point. Like, by 2030, 30% of the workforce are going to be Gen Z. Gen A will be in the workforce in like 2 years or something. Like, they grew up in such a technologically advanced world. They'll be coming into the workforce making their own LLMs. They're not going to be like, hey, we agree. If you're not using this, we're okay with that. They're going to be like, hey, we want like forward-thinking organizations that meet our needs, our values, that we feel part of. Because as well, these younger generations want to be part of something. They are so much more motivated than our generations ever were by purpose and ownership and co-creation. And so I think it's only becoming more important. And so it comes back with like, well, as an organization, what are you taking a stand for? What is your AI literacy training, not just for your data teams, but for every single person within that organization? What does your communication look like? How transparent are you being? Why are you sharing the why behind the tools, behind the automation? Like, people want to understand. It's not good enough just to say, this is what we're doing. It's this is what we're doing and why. And we are open to your feedback. But this is, why we think this is the best way forward. Involving those people in the rollouts, making them those co-creators, scenario planning for that cultural change, because that's going to happen. And actually, what are you going to do when that change starts to occur? And trying to just be proactive about it instead of burying your head in the sand.
Love it. Bianca, it's been a fantastic conversation. I want to be respectful of your time. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer because there's a couple of other things I wanted to ask you, but we'll have to save that for next time.
Part two.
But thank you again for joining me. I think there's a lot of takeaways from this conversation. So really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Bob. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will see you next time.